for coming today. This is going to be a more focused review of the NIH fellowship pathway, in part because we've changed our graduate student qualifier approach so that we have grant-style qualifiers. And most of you who are PhD students in the IBS will have recently written and defended your thesis topic and are in a prime position to think about writing a fellowship to support your dissertation research. I put the F-32 in here as well. The F-32 is a postdoctoral grant, and it is very similar in structure to a pre-doctoral grant. So a lot of the things that you learn from one are good for the other. I think most of you are graduate students. Are any of you postdocs? I know you are. Okay, a couple postdocs. So if we go through this and you hear things that sound different or confusing, please let me know. I'll also orient you to some of the things that we've put online to support your fellowships. But how many of you are thinking about writing a fellowship application in the next 6 months? Perfect. How many of you have written one before? Okay. So please interrupt me if you have specific questions, and we'll try to talk about them. I'm using the NIH fellowship as a model, only because many of the components are parts of other fellowships, and I'll show you where you can look up other foundation fellowships that we use similar information. You should be thinking, yes, I'll write the NIH one if you're eligible for it, and I'm also going to send a similar project out to American Heart Association, to another foundation that would be interested in your work. You can write many, you can only accept one, but it increases your chances to get one, and sometimes foundations are really interested in the work that we're putting forward. So, I sort of laugh because those of you who've done a PhD qualifier recently have basically written the research strategy section, and you thought that was a lot of work. And then you realize that, oh no, there's all this other stuff. Man, I can't get this forward. You're sharing your screen. Why is it not moving? How weird is that? It's really weird. Okay, I don't know what I'm wrong. Okay, so you have basically finished these things in green. The specific things in the research strategy page of a traditional fellowship. Hi, welcome, come in and get food, please write in. But then there's all this other stuff, and I put it up here as a long list because you thought you were done, and actually there are more pages of work still to be done. So there's little bits at the front end. You need to write a really long section on the applicant's background. We'll talk a bit about this, but this is a place where you describe what your experiences have been, what your goals are in research, what your long-term plans are. It's also in an NIH grant where you show all of your grades. And you set out your training. It's a lot of information. It's not something we cover anywhere else. You'll be preparing sections about why you chose your sponsor and your institution. You'll be preparing some things about how you talked about the fellowship together. Those are, I think, relatively easy and straightforward. Your mentor or sponsor or co-sponsors need to prepare a pretty large training plan for you. And it's crucially important that this training plan is related to your goals. Seems obvious, but sometimes we prepare them separately and don't go back and match it up. And that, in fact, the goals that you have are actually achieved through your research strategy. Okay? So that can get pretty heavy, and we'll talk about that. There are letters of support that you need to coordinate by timing, and there's some institutional commitment to training. So I want to make sure that you see that the scope is pretty large, but it is completely tractable, and we'll talk about it. So at the end of today's discussion, you'll have a strategy for your application that many of you seem to be right in the process of thinking about or writing. You'll be able to describe the elements of the application and think about what reviewers are waiting for. This is really important. And identify the essentials of the peer review process and look for other fellowship opportunities. Remember, we want to apply to these two places, planning to accept one. Okay. So one of the biggest questions is, are you ready? Now, many of you have raised your hands suggesting you think you are ready. and some of you may be ready by default. Called It's Coming Up, I'm going to read it anyway. But it's going to take a little while to prepare this fellowship application. Do you have some time to focus? You will not be able to just tell your mentor, I'm going to quit the lab, I'm going to go home and write my fellowship for a while. That will not fly. So you need to think about how you're going to build in the time that's needed to write the fellowship while you're still being productive in the lab. Maybe you have some pilot data. That will often strengthen the work that you're proposing. Maybe some of it was covered in your strategy, maybe it wasn't, so you'll have to think about that. We're talking today about NIH grants. They require that you're a U.S. citizen or permanent resident for most of the F-series, but not all, and most of the K-series, but not all. So if you're a non-citizen or non-permanent resident, please pay attention to the foundation page, which often has a broader group of applicants than the NIH system. Many of you said, yes, I have a deadline in mind, and we'll be interested to find out whether you know what that deadline is. And I'm hoping that between now and then, you will have updated your goals in your individual development plan. Okay? So most NIH grants want to see the words individual development plan as part of your training goals and what you're achieving. So not only have you finished this plan, you've identified some things you want to work on. Okay? So we talked a little bit about that last year. I'm completely happy to talk more about these things on another time. Laura recently found the University of Alabama Birmingham Grant Library, which in fact includes a large number of verbatim grants. They're very generous for posting them. So the NIH has posted quite a few grants, but they have posted a good zillion of grants. This means if you say, well, I don't know how to write that section at all, I am clueless, you can go and look at some grants that were successful. I think that's helpful for orientation, but it really doesn't solve the problem of what you're going to write. Okay? So you're not going to copy down whatever Elmer Fudd wrote in his F31 and then change 3 words to cancer. Right? You're really going to start to think about what were the goals of that section and how do I achieve them in my own project. Okay? For those of you who are taking notes, I am completely happy to send this out back to the email list, so you don't have to copy all the links and stuff, but this goes straight to the links. Okay. We're talking today about 3 particular grants, and the National Institutes of Health hosts its grant opportunities as what they call funding opportunity announcements. They update them about every 3 years, so if you see one that's older than that, it's probably been updated. We're talking today about PA 18671, which is the parent F31. This is the one that many institutes have signed on to that will support a graduate student fellowship. There's a sister one that's called the PA 18666, which is to promote diversity in health-related research, also for graduate students. And there's PA 18670, which is for postdoctoral fellowships. So some of you may be eligible for the Fellowship to Promote Diversity in Health-Related Research. This is exactly the same fellowship as the parent F31, exactly the same fellowship, but there's often 2 piles of money at the participating institutes. Okay? This one requires that you get a letter from me saying that I know that you're eligible with the criteria that they have at the NIH for this kind of proposal. The NIH is really interested in diversifying the researchers of tomorrow. This is an accounting problem for them. So the only way they know if the fellowship was given to somebody who was diverse is to have a separate fellowship. I know that sounds really dumb, but there it is. So you could apply for the parent if you were from a diverse background, and then they would never know, but that's not necessarily good for them. This one, they at least know this person was eligible to participate here. Some people say, well, I don't want to have the diversity grant because that's somehow better, different, not as good, something. Yes, you do. Because if there's a separate pile of money available for it, and you're eligible, not everybody's eligible for these grants. So this potentially can increase your odds of getting that fellowship. Okay? I'm happy to talk about these more as we go along. Okay, so I hope that all of you know that sending in a grant proposal at GW means that you have to submit it through the Cayuse system, right? So anybody who's thinking about doing this, if you're writing a fellowship application, you're the PI, right? So you need to go through this ERA Common user registration to exist as a PI in the NIH system, which is ERA Commons. How many of you have done that already? Great. Okay. So there's a form. It goes through to the university. Your department administrator can probably help you with that. And it will get you into the ERA Commons system. That allows you to write a grant and find out where your grant is. But at the end of the day, you're going to prepare all of the SF-424 pages in the NIH application, and at the end of the day, it gets submitted through Cayuse at GW to the NIH, right? GW, like many institutions, has a deadline that's earlier than the NIH for you to submit your fellowship. This will make you feel really sick and be unhappy, and it's just the reality of the story. The biggest reason to get it in there is for any of the monetary components of the grant to be certified and approved by the GW leadership. So what you often will do is, and they have 5 to 7 business days in advance of the deadline, okay? What they will often do is allow you to submit all of the components of the grant and then say, well, I'm going to update my, it's usually the research strategy or the training plan you want to update. I'll give you another update when it's all the way through the system. Totally okay. So you can obsessively revise your training plan up until closer to the deadline and give the substitute file through the administrators for GW and Cayuse, okay? Some of you have department administrators who are perfectly comfortable submitting an F-31. That's probably a good thing to use your local people. We also have some people at pre-award who are willing to help you with this part. So if you run into any problem with your local administrators, let me know and we can link you to the other folks. But it's better to work with your own department administrator if you can. Anybody have any questions about this so far? Okay. I basically said that. So it's going to require 5 to 7 days in advance of the NIH deadline for checks. These checks are done by GW. There's another checking system that's done by NIH once you finally submit it. Okay. So here's the first part of the problem that you won't like anyway, because this thing is a cell phone and it's actually used for talking to people. I detest phones, so I understand that there are many other things you can do with that. It is very important that you communicate with your program officer at the NIH. You won't want to do this, so it'll be okay. It'll work out fine. So when you look at the F-31 FOA in your particular area, there will be a program officer listed in the long FOA. It's about 25 pages long. That for whatever your institute's in or the IC-specific stuff, it'll name a person and a contact. My suggestion to you, once you're really kind of ready to go, is to email that person first, saying something like, I plan to submit an F-31 fellowship and I have a few questions. My draft, aims, idea, mentor, give them a clue what it's about, are below. Could we schedule a phone call to discuss my application, say Tuesday at 1, something like that, okay? They will promptly write back and say, well, maybe not Tuesday, but how about Wednesday or whatever it is. You'll come up with a time this will work. You're going to call them. Here are some sample discussion topics. You need to know that your fellowship fits that institute and that program. Okay? You don't want to do a ton of work and be sending it the wrong place. So you really want to have a candid conversation with your program officer about some of the issues about fit with the fellowship. Okay? They'll know a little bit about your ideas. They'll know something about your mentor or the subject area you're in, and they may have some other suggestions on it. These are some of the questions that I would propose you're going to ask and write down the answers to. And they might send you to another person or a different grant. That's perfectly normal activity. The person that you're talking to is called a program officer. This person would really like to have your project in his or her collection of projects. They're really proud of having funded awards in their collection of people. They really want to foster your success. The program officer, who can be really helpful to you, has nothing at all to do with the review of your fellowship. Nothing. So you can ask them anything you want to know. Okay? You might ask them, how will the application be reviewed? Is there a standing study section that's going to review it? You can go look up the roster of who was there last time. Maybe you can feel better or worse, I don't know. But the program officer wants you to be successful and will answer any of the questions that you have to make it successful. They have nothing to do with review. So this is where you can say, well, I'm kind of worried because I'm thinking about a collaborator at so-and-so, and I don't know how that's going to work, and what do you think? And they'll tell you what they think. It will never come into review. So whether it's there in review or not in review, reviewed by completely separate people. Okay? So this is a place to ask what you need to know. Take their advice seriously. They know what's going on. If you're applying to the NIH, there are 3 standard due dates every year, and they fall into 3 cycles. So many of you are probably thinking about April 8th. So maybe thinking August or December. That would be in, April 8th is in the first cycle, so it has due dates in this January to May period. It's going to go to what we call scientific merit review, which is the thing we call study section, where it will actually get reviewed. It then goes to the advisory council. This is an internal NIH group of people that says, sure, fund all of those grants. Okay? So they, based on the score that you get, you might be put forward by the program officer to get funded, and the internal group will say, sure, we'll fund that, that's great. There's usually a rubber stamp, but not always. Okay? And that would mean that the first dollar would land here at GW for your support somewhere between September and December, in theory. Anyway. So what is this study section? So I chaired a study section for about 10 years at NDS, Neuroscience Group, and I sat on a study section at NIGMS for another 10 years. It's about 20 to 30 scientists from around the country. They go into geographical distribution. Each group has a research focus, and you can see who sits on chartered study sections for a variety of subjects. It's in the Center for Scientific Review. It's a range of people who I would argue are experts. For the most part, if you're on a study section, you have had funded NIH work recently. So you really are, you do know what's going on here. What happens at the study section? So we're the study section. And in advance of study section, you would get an electronic link to the grants that were in your portfolio. You know, I'm in Iowa, so-and-so's in California, so-and-so's in Michigan. You get a list of grants you have to read, probably about 2 months in advance of the study section. Each grant's going to be read by at least 2 people, often 3, sometimes 4. If you're the primary reviewer, you have to prepare a statement about what you see as the strengths and weaknesses of that proposal. And if you're the primary reviewer, you will be the one to say, this fellowship is from Mary Jones. It's an expert account of the blah, 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 and she's going to test for something or other. I think it's fantastic. So I'd recommend a score of 1. Something like that from you. The secondary reviewer will read for the same thing, will still have comments made, and will usually chime in after the primary reviewer and say, yeah, what she said, but I also think you should look at the so-and-so. The other 18 to 28 scientists have not read your proposal. They will vote on it. So they can read it if they want to, but they haven't read your proposal. They might know your mentor. They might be familiar with the area of research. At the end of the primary and secondary reviewer saying, well, I'd give this a 1. 1 is really good. 9 is terrible, okay? I would give, so the primary says, I'm going to give this a 1. And the secondary says, well, I see a real problem with the approach. I just don't think this is feasible. It's not going to happen. I'm going to give it a 4, okay? They'll discuss it if there's that much difference between the scores, and then everybody in the room will vote, having not read your proposal on the basis of what those 2 people said. They could sometimes be reading through really quickly on electronic computers and say, oops, no, that's okay. I did that before, and this is perfectly fine. And secondary reviewers say, okay, I'll take it to a 3. Okay? So then everybody votes, and you get an average score. And then it's magically multiplied by 10 for another reason. So you end up getting impact score, and sometimes they are turned into percentiles. It's a percentile that's compared to the last 2 study sections of scores, just to kind of balance it. Nonetheless, you're going to get this score. You're going to be obsessively checking ERA comments for your score. You'll get the score before you get any comments, and you'll say, huh, it says 42. It's all it says, 42. That's a middle-of-the-road score. I would say that in the current funding environment, that's very unlikely to get funded. But you will also get, about a month later, the summary statement, the narrative statement of all the reviewers saying what they liked and they didn't like about the proposal. Okay? So you can absolutely get funded on a revision of that 42 if you take those summary statements to heart. And we can talk about those in a minute. So NIH has its system for reviewing this entire pile of stuff. Your primary and your secondary and potentially your third reviewer are going to look at this, and it is available to the whole study section. So you should be thinking you're communicating to the whole study section. One of the parts of the proposal is a fellowship biosketch. Have any of you completed this? Okay, so not bad, but it looks like only maybe a fourth or a third of you have finished it. So your NIH biosketch will be revised for the rest of your research life. If you're applying for NIH grants, this is a standard way of describing your experiences and contributions. As graduate students and postdocs, you probably have some contributions, not gazillions of contributions, and they have designed what they call the fellowship biosketch that captures the kinds of things you might have done as an undergraduate, as a graduate student, as a postdoc. Okay? Definitely look at the sample online. It's going to look sort of like this. It has to be on their forms, their way. My general recommendation for anything with the NIH is to use Helvetica 11, right? Which is about the smallest font that they will accept. If you use a font that's too small, they will reject your grant. That's a really dumb reason to get your grant rejected. They also have margins. Don't blow it. But at the same time, I often would submit things at Arial 11, which is bigger, because when there's a human being reading this grant, like me, and if it's packed in there, it gives a very challenging environment for the reviewer to read. So try to be human, okay? It's not a machine that's reading, it's a person who has 10 other grants to read, and you don't want to make them mad. I hate to tell you that, but you don't want to make them mad as your first step, okay? So think about having everything in your proposal, even though you have to submit separate PDFs, in the same font. And somewhere in the 11 world is a good place to be. So your biosketch is going to be a maximum of 5 pages. It starts the same way every single time. It asks for your ERA user commons name, so you have to do that first. That will be blank. You talk about your education. Your personal statement is important. Your personal statement is important for the rest of your life, and it will change as your career progresses. This is a place where you just say, my long-term research interests involve blah, blah, blah. So far, I've done this and that. As an undergraduate, at Swarthmore, I conducted research with blah, 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 and then I've done this and so. You make a narrative statement. You describe any of your contributions, posters, abstracts, outreach, a whole lot of stuff in here. Later, when you've published 50 papers, you'll be describing your papers here as contributions. But go and take a look at this. Those of you who have done it, what kinds of things did you learn that you want to tell about for your peers? What was a surprise?
Can you just repeat the question?
So if you've written an NIH biosketch already, what advice do you have for your peers?
You can divide your contribution design into sections by contribution. For example, I'm a postdoc grad student, so I have a section of my PhD work, my doctoral training, another section for my other projects for my PhD, and a section for my current postdoctoral work. That probably makes it easier to read, and then you can kind of divide up your post presentations or the other papers accordingly.
Good.
And I would say the personal statement is more important because it's the first page of our biosketch. It should not be too lengthy. It should be kind of precise and concise as much as possible and make a really good impact when they read, because we do not have much time to read all of these pages.
Mm-hmm. So this is the front page of a Real Person's Fellowship biosketch, and you can see that the personal statement is about half a page long. I would not go longer than that. Okay? So there's lots more to think about with biosketches, but I'd encourage all of you to tackle that now. That's generally pretty straightforward, right? You have another section that I think is extremely important, and this is often really challenging for applicants. This is the applicant background and goals section, and it includes 3 different areas. Your dissertation and research experience, so this is for the predoctoral fellowship. Your training goals and objectives, this should be like highlighted with stars on it. It's really important. And the activities planned under this award, which are also that way. So in this section, which goes a long way, you're going to describe how you became interested in research, what your long-term career goals are, and how this application, the one you're writing, is going to assist you in getting there. So what's interesting about a training proposal is that it's not separate pieces. It is interwoven. So yes, you have research goals, but your research goals are a platform for you to be trained well in research. So it is a perfectly nice thing to say, I was really interested in T-cell biology, and then I suddenly discovered proteomics, and that was really cool, but now I need to learn some bioinformatics. I don't know any of that. It's perfectly okay in here to say, I started here, I learned those things, I did this stuff, and then I became interested in this, and now I need to learn some new things there, and they will be accomplished in the proposal that I'm giving you, right? So you want to link your interest in research to this proposal. Do mention your individual development plan and your SMART goals and goal setting as part of this. You want to look like you're in control of what your plans are, and that's really important. This is a good place to discuss any personal factors that affected your advancement. So if you had a medical issue in college and didn't do well for an entire semester in your grades, and you come back and everything is fine now, this is a place to describe it, because your reviewer was going to see your grades and would like to know what happened there in that semester where you got C's, okay? So if there's something that happened here, this is a good place to put it into a good light. So this is a place to say, yes, I had this issue, and this is how I resolved that issue, and now I'm perfectly fine going forward. Now, obviously, there's a limit to how much you want to say, and I have absolutely seen lots of people here who said, you know, I was struck with a behavioral health issue, I got some counseling, I came back to school, and I've gotten A's since then, right? You want to be able to say you have addressed whatever is going on here, okay? But this can be a little bit challenging. It's really important to recognize that the NIH and NRSAs are not designed to make you a better teacher. They don't care. They are interested in your research career. And you may think they're linked, but they're not in the NIH's mind. So you can say, I've done some TAing, and I've done this, and maybe I'd like to end up at a liberal arts college. That's an okay thing to say, but they are interested in your research career. They will not support you doing TA shifts on development. Okay? They're pretty serious about it, and they discuss it at length. In this area, you should include a training timeline. So you're presumably applying for 3 years. And so you should give a sense of what you're going to do in the first year, what you're going to do in the second year, what you're going to do in the third year. And that includes things like going to a workshop at Cold Spring Harbor Labs that they would pay for on the training component, presenting your work at 2 national meetings, going to a Gordon conference. You have some goals for when you're going to publish a paper. You have some goals for when you're going to work with a collaborator to learn a new technique and then finish that part. Put it into a timeline, which might not be your aims timeline exactly, right? So you have aim 1 and aim 2, and probably you're going to do some aim 2 stuff, a little bit in aim 1, a little bit of cross-filtering there. But give them a sense of what you need to learn to be successful in your proposal and how you're going to learn it and when you're going to learn it. Your sponsor is going to describe a training career development plan, and it really should be matching what you say here. So this is an important place to talk with your mentor and or write your training and career development plan and then give it to your mentor for discussion so that it all fits together into one story. It is a very dangerous thing to have your mentor write a training and career development plan without talking to you about what your goals are. It seems obvious, but it's an important conversation to have because your mentor has tools and connections and things that he or she might add to your training if they know what you're thinking about doing. Right? So this is really important to have it be the same. Okay. I think that a lot of trainees find this part very difficult. Yeah.
What if you're like within 3 years of graduating, say like you plan to graduate in 2 years, should you still write that training plan as like a 3-year timeline?
That's a great question. Yes, you should. Well, so most people are going to have as part of this how long a person in your program normally takes to finish. Okay? So it's probably going to come from someone like me or a grad program. You know, normally people finish within 5 to 6 years, whatever the program is. If you're now in your 3rd year and you're proposing work going forward, it wouldn't get funded for about 6 months if it were successful, and by then you're in your 4th year. And so, one, you should absolutely write a fellowship even if it's only to support 1 year of research. No question about it. It is really good for you to do this, okay? Not the writing part, yeah, that's good for you. The winning the money part is really good for you. And it ends up on your CV for the rest of your life. There are strong data that show that people who win fellowships from the NIH go on to have strong research careers and are more likely to get Irwin funding. Now, this is sort of a tautology, I get that, but this is worth doing even if you were only proposing one. So I think you may want to think about, you know, I'm proposing it for now, but maybe you're going to accomplish some of those things before you get funded, right? Just make sure that you are honest about where you are on that. It's perfectly fine. I have certainly seen people apply for all 3 years of funding and get done sooner. And what happens then? You give the money back to the NIH. There's nothing immoral about that. That's a good thing. You're done. You're done. You're going off to do a postdoc or whatever you're going to do next. Okay? So I don't think it's a bad thing to write for longer than you think it's going to take, but you need to justify the time. Other questions? So the NIH stipend just went up. Yay, sort of. Okay, so the NIH fellowship is going to pay for 3 things, which is not much, actually. It's going to pay some money toward your stipend. At the moment, the predoctoral trainee stipend is $24,816. So if you were in Montana or in DC, you're going to get $24,816. There's an obvious problem there. We'll come back to that in a minute. The postdoctoral trainees get $50,004. And this increases by year of postdoc. So there's a listed summary, and you would get paid that amount if you got funded right now. If you waited till next year to write the grant, the stipend level would change and the scale would change. Okay? So part of it is a stipend to you. Part of it is the possibility of tuition and fees. So if you are still taking classes or you want to take a workshop someplace or you want to do something that requires tuition and fees, registration fees for a workshop, that kind of thing, they'll pay 60% of whatever you request up to $16,000. Okay? So that's great. And then they give what they call an institutional allowance for fellows. So for the pre-doc, it's $4,200. For the postdoc, it's $9,750. And this is a place that you get your health insurance coverage costs and other kinds of funds that you can spend. Okay? So that's pretty good. Each fellowship will have its own designation for what they're paying for and how much they're paying. Your PI doesn't get any money. There's very little money in here for research supplies or anything else, which is what they're going to pay for. They get what's called 8% indirect cost recovery, which is way lower than their research grant. This is really good for you, right? Cool. So if they save money on the budget because you have your own money, there's more money in the lab overall to pay for lots of things. So pre-doctoral trainees, the stipend is $24,816. I know they're thinking about how to increase that, but that's nowhere near our pre-doctoral stipend amount. And the Dean for Research Administration says that he will make up this amount to the current stipend level for pre-docs. That's a pretty big institutional commitment, okay? So that's going to be part of the institutional commitment component there. So you shouldn't lose money by getting that fellowship. Now, if you go and look at the fellowship, the foundation fellowship list that we show later on in here, Some of those fellowships pay more than this. You get all of the money. You get whatever the money is that you get. So there are other pre-doctoral fellowships that pay a lot more than this. And if you win them, you get that. So every reason to. Okay. I'm not really going to talk about specific aims because I assume that most of you have written them. And I'm not really going to talk about the research strategy because I'm assuming most of you have written them. So I'll just do highlights. Yeah.
I have a question. As you mentioned, you can do some stuff before you even get the money for the fellowship. But will reviewers look at it and be like, oh, that person is moving towards their goals anyway. They're doing this research already, so why should I bother and give them this fellowship since they're already there?
So that's a good question for every grant we all write, right? So since it takes 6 to 9 months for you to get the money for the thing you're proposing, and you're not sitting on your hands waiting for stuff, there is kind of a strategy in thinking about how you propose work to the NIH. Many people who are writing research grants, R01 grants, often want to make it sound like the first aim that they're proposing, they kind of know the answer, okay? You have to write it in an aspirational way, but you've done a lot of work there. You know a lot of things. It's not done. It's not published. But you're well over understanding what the issue is there. Your subsequent aims 2 and 3, you might have preliminary data, but really it's a little bit further out from what you know is to be true. Here, I think you're going to propose what's going to make a good training plan for you. If you manage to accomplish some while you were writing the grant, that's great. Remember the other part, which is you might not get funded on the first go around. You might have to do a revision. And so you may look at your aims at that point and say, well, I kind of got this part of it done, and that makes this even more feasible, and it's really fantastic. So I've modified my first aim a little bit. Okay? Okay. Most fellowships have 2 aims. At most 3, don't go crazy. Don't number them 2A, 2B, 2C. Don't make the reviewer crazy and want to kill you right away, okay? So we've talked a lot about how to write specific aims. There's a narrative component, and then you describe why the approach you're proposing in the specific aim is a good approach. So there's a lot of what I would call persuasive writing going on here. It isn't just a list, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this other thing. You're using persuasion to convince the reviewer your approach is a really good approach, and also it's feasible, right? And it's going to answer the question that you had in your hypothesis. Specific aims pages are really hard to write because of that level. You've written some specific aims for your qualifier, those of you who've just done your qualifier, and you are likely to go back and revise them with this kind of thinking in mind to be most effective. Research strategies. Ask yourself, so what, every now and then when you're looking in your strategy. Okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to part the Red Sea, and I'm going to do CRISPR, and then I'm going to find this. So what? And I know that it seems so simple, but why is that a good idea? What will it help you understand, and did it actually test your hypothesis? Ask yourself, so what, and then answer it in that paragraph, okay? Because the reviewer's asking, so what, already. So begin to think about, why are you doing this? Why is this approach a good one compared to all the others? You chose it for a reason. Give me a reason why. And of course, you all know that you need to have anticipated results and alternative approaches. That's the part I always have fun. Because I really liked the way I was doing it, and I didn't want to do the alternative way. So, we don't have a problem. Okay. In experimental design, this is becoming a hot issue at the NIH in part because we have a variety of studies that are suggesting that a lot of preclinical data can't be reproduced. And the reason for that is because we've had a lousy experimental design. So I want you to take this pretty seriously and think about it. Okay? So just doing it because there are 3 possible examples is really not good enough. Think about how you're going to test your hypothesis, rationalize your approach, describe the sample size, how you'll align things, what statistics there are, what controls there are, how many replicates you need, and why. So it is a common problem with population studies that people don't describe power analyses. Okay? You need to be very clear about how you're setting out your experimental design. There's some nice units I can give you if you're not quite sure what's going on. You do cite papers. I would say most fellowships are going to have, maybe, I don't know, 40 publications, but don't expect your reviewer to read them, okay? And this is not the place to cite the first time Lemley actually made a gel, okay? So talk about things that are relevant to your work right now. And be fair. Don't be really skewed. Every field has, agrees and disagrees. Be fair there. Don't look like you're completely in one camp or another, and include anticipated outcomes. Okay. Lots of people are using working models. These are 2 working models out of an F31 proposal that describe where the research is going in the particular thing. This is low and high cell density, VPT, something or other, I don't know what makes a molecule, right here, GTP. This one says in aim 1, I'm going to look at this, and in aim 2, I'm going to look at this. That's actually really helpful to the reviewer. Some people, here's an aim 3, 4, and 5, went a little nuts. But if you have something that can be, these happen to be sort of pathway models. This is some part of a transmembrane signaling system. If you have something that you can put in a synopsis so that the reviewer, who's reading 10 grants on 10 different subjects, can kind of get where you're going, that is fantastic. Some people argue you should put the working model in your specific aims. I don't really agree with that. I think they should be in the first part of your strategy itself, okay? That, here's the problem. The problem is that that doesn't signal for that thing. And so my approach is I'm going to manipulate this by cutting it off, and I'm going to add that as an exogenous one, and this is going to work. So if you have a model that can conceptualize your work, it is a really, really good thing, okay? Don't take the copy out of Albert's and add your favorite molecule. Redraw it, okay? Okay. Here comes the sponsor and co-sponsor statement. So many of you have investigators who haven't trained a PhD student before. They're junior investigators doing really cool stuff. The reason that GW hired them is because they're doing really cool stuff, and the reason you chose them is because it's really cool. But they may not have a lot of experience training people yet. Fellowships and training grants are involving mentors who have experience training people. Not that any of you have experienced, but things come up in PhD training or postdoctoral training that you and the mentor have to work out, and he or she may be figuring out how to do that, okay? If your mentor is junior, you should consider a co-mentor who has training experience, okay? The co-mentor may have trained lots and lots of other people and would sit on your thesis committee, might be part of your advisory committee if you're a postdoc. You have to have an advisory committee if you're a postdoc. But think about what 2 people might be bringing to that. So do not have 2 junior people as your mentors. They will never, ever get funded. Okay? Think about what you need to have mentors who will really spend time with you and have some experience.
A question along with that. Do you think there would be much of a difference between having a co-sponsor and having a highly invested senior investigator as part of your mentoring team? For mentoring team, I'm talking about the K award. It's a little different.
Yeah, so it is a little different. So usually when you're looking at sponsors here, the NIH is looking at a couple of things, and one of them is research funding. So burying somebody on your advisory team is not a good idea. Right? If you're working with a junior person who may not have a lot of funding yet and also doesn't have a lot of training experience, you want that other person there to say it's all going to turn out fine. Okay? So if you have somebody that you're collaborating with in the K universe who has access to particular samples or analyses or something like that, absolutely have them on your advisory team. But the expectation and what you're going to end up writing about in your training plan and in the sponsor's training plan is, how will you interact with these people, right? So they want to know, I will meet once a week with my sponsor and co-sponsor together, or I will meet with my mentor once a week with the lab meetings, and then I'll have a one-on-one hour with her, and then I'll meet with my advisory team quarterly, which is a good frequency, and I expect that I can contact Dr. So-and-so in North Carolina, who will tell me important information about this analysis, okay? They want you to detail how, when, and where you're interacting with these people and what you want from them. So there might be people who have particular connections to professional organizations, and they will network you into the American Society for Hematology, okay? There might be people that you're actually doing an analysis with, and you need to go to their lab and do that analysis and come back, okay? They will accept you interacting with people on Skype, but they do not like it because they know that that person's not really that available to you, okay? But there are some projects that are multi-site, involve multi-site mentors. I would say for most of the PhD students, they're expecting it to be here and now, okay? With maybe a collaborator who might be collaborating, but not on your advisory team, right? So, in the sponsor section, the sponsor is going to write about his or her available research support in a table. There's no hiding here. So the reason why they ask for your mentor's research support is because there's no money in the fellowship for research. So there has to be money for research somewhere else, or you won't get funded. Right? So they're going to ask what other grants are available to your mentor or co-mentor. So this is a place where you may want to throw money at the question, depending on how well funded your sponsor is. They want a list of the sponsor's previous trainees, and they want the outcomes of the last 5. Okay. They want to see a training plan. We're going to come back to this in a second. That describes the training plan, the environment, and the research facilities available to you for this project. They want to know who else is in the lab or the research group at the same time you would be funded. Are there 5 other postdocs, and so you're not going to get attention? Is there one person? What's going on here? What are they working on? How would you interact with them? They're going to ask your mentor or sponsor for how well he or she thinks you are qualified and what your potential is for a research career. So this is a good time for them to talk about your research career, not your training, not that you're a good parent, not anything else, but your research career. Okay. So this is another 6 pages. Altogether, it's 6 pages from your sponsor, and you really want this to dovetail with your training goals. Many, many people, and I know this would be alarming, many students, postdocs, and fellows write this section themselves. Whoa! And then they say, I've taken the liberty to work this out. Let's discuss it now. Okay? That's a pretty sophisticated thing to do. This happens all the time in clinical university. The hardest part to write is the training plan environment research facilities. There are lots of examples, you can see them online. But this training plan, do you have any courses to take? Are you taking any workshops elsewhere? Which meetings are you going to? Which month? This is very specific. It's not, you'll kind of present your stuff once a year. You'll go to some journal hubs. It'll be fine. Okay? So this is a hard thing for your sponsor to write. Give him or her a lot of time. Make sure that you're really coordinating with your goals and their goals in this plan, okay? Okay. Yes, we have some tips. Here are some things you could put in that training plan. Your plan and his or hers plan. Again, you should mention the individual development plan and what gaps you have that are appropriate for your stage of career. Any remaining coursework that you have. Any specific skills you need, short courses and workshops. You might take an MBL class, you might go to Postman Harbor, you might need some sophisticated clinical populations that you can only get through some collaboration. New research skills. So when I set up a study section, we wanted pre-doctoral trainees, if it fit, to have a collaboration of something new that was coming to the lab. Could be a new technique, could be a new viewpoint, could be something new. So you're working on things that have a lot to do with your mentor's research. That's why you're together. But this is now a place for you to take a little baby step out and have maybe a collaboration that's your collaboration to help address your set of questions. Okay? That's a good thing. So describing what's new that you're proposing is actually a really good idea. Anything that's new, you need to describe who will teach you that thing and when and where. Okay. Don't forget all the other stuff. You're going to be learning how to write manuscripts. You're going to be learning how to write grants. You're going to be presenting at meetings. Don't forget all the other stuff in that large compendium of competencies that we're hoping you achieve in PhD training and postdoc training. The competencies for clinician investigators, there are 14 of them. Don't forget all that stuff. And I can help you on that. Describe exactly the meeting you're talking about. and that you're presenting there, not that you're attending and watching the world of I. What are your goals for publications? So, I think that the work that most of AIM 1 is likely to be in Journal of Cell Biology or something like that. We're going to try and prepare that in November. It will probably take a while, blah, blah, blah. That's on your little timeline of your 3 years. I have a goal to submit this work there. It may not happen, but you have thought about how much it will take to get it to a full unit of a paper, and you have a target for that paper. Describe lab meetings, research in progress. Some people have labs where they rotate who presents over, a month. Some people have lab meetings where each person talks about their advances over the week. Some people do group lab meetings. Some people do multiple things. Describe what's going on here and what kind of input you're getting. Okay? If you're a postdoc, describe when and where you meet with your advisory group, because you don't have a thesis committee as a postdoc, but you are expected to have advice given to you pretty often. And that's really important. Same set of ideas. Okay, this is what I was talking about before. Think about how your training is building competencies. So these are 6 competencies from the National Postdoc Association that you should have when you're coming in as a postdoc in a research career. Discipline-specific conceptual knowledge and critical thinking. Are you done? So you're probably going to get more thinking about these things at journal clubs, clinical experiences, coursework, something like that. Research skill development, including computational skills and data management. Communication skills, oral, written, lay public. You'll do that in career courses and journal clubs, presenting at meetings, and so forth. Set out your goals for these things. You're going to be good at some of these things, and you're going to be average at some. And what you want to do is shift yourself forward toward your research career. So here are some ways to think about some of your training goals that might help you frame them. You don't have to do this thing, but this is a way to think about what am I putting in that training plan as ideas. So those of you who raised your hand saying I'm going to turn in a fellowship, have you talked to the people who are writing your letters of recommendation? Okay, so for a fellowship at the NIH, your mentor is not a letter of recommendation. That's a separate thing. Then you need 3 letters of recommendation. So tell me, for those of you who thought about it, who is writing your other 3 letters of recommendation? Where are good places to look?
My dissertation committee.
Your dissertation committee, okay?
Undergraduate research advisor.
Graduate research advisor. May or may not know your research well, but yes. Collaborator. For some of these, there's a special letter for a collaborator. So that is a separate letter, not one of your 3 letters of recommendation. Your undergraduate research advisor. Sometimes the lab next door, where you have a lot of collaborative work. They're not your collaborator, but you've been working on a project together and made significant advances.
Previous employers?
Previous supporters?
Employers, sorry.
Employers. So that's more common in biomedical engineering than it is in biomedical straight-up stuff, but yes. Remember, these are all focused on your research career, okay? So those are some pretty good ideas. Your referees, depending on how well you kept in touch with people, may not know what you're doing. So you may want to send a quick email out and send them a copy of your CV or your biosketch and say, I'm applying for a fellowship and I'd like to ask if you'd write a strong letter of recommendation for me. Remember, when I was in your lab 4 years ago, we were working on this study looking at myasthenia gravis, and I did blah, 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 and I worked with Sam, and we found this so-and-so. Remind them. I've had over 40 trainees. I can't remember what year they were in my lab. Okay? And I know that sounds like, oh, that must be true. Okay? So give them a little paragraph about you that you hope they will say. Give a different paragraph to each of your letters of recommendation so they don't write the same thing, which happens a lot. Okay? So it's useful it's useful to just sort of recap what you hope they might talk about. And it's perfectly okay to say, I hope you might talk about the project I did when we did such and so, and then we presented this such and so. Totally appropriate. So, in many cases, if it's a whole letter, you might draft the whole letter. Okay? I've taken the liberty of drafting a letter. It seems it's a very positive thing, even though it feels incredibly awkward. Okay, yes.
So I've had this like issue in the past before when you have hit your limit and you don't know who to go with. I have an undergraduate advisor who had me for classes and did research with me and knows me very well personally. But I had another advisor at the NIH who I did bigger, more widespread work with. In that instance, which would be the one to choose. Yeah.
So remember the purpose. We have letters of recommendation. I hope we're forming networks of people who support us, but they're supporting us in different sort of avenues of our lives. This one is about your research career. So the closer the person's experience with you is aligned to your research career, the better. The other thing is that when you finally decided who your referees are, it is helpful in your candidate background and training roles to identify Dr. Smith at NIH, parenthesis, who'll supply a letter of recommendation. Because the reviewer has 10 grants with 30 letters of recommendation, and sometimes you can't figure out what's going on there either. Okay? So that's not a requirement, but if you're that organized, that helps the reviewer a lot. Okay? So name names. These letter writers, so tell people like 2 months in advance of the submission date. A long time, okay? And you may need to remind them, but they're going to write the letter and submit it completely separately from your fellowship. Okay, it's going to go in through ERA Commons. They don't have to log into ERA Commons. They don't have to be an NIH researcher to do it, but they send it to a specific place. You need to tell the letter writer what your ERA Commons username is, your first and last name, and the funding opportunity announcement number. Remember that PA 18677? They need to have that to log in to submit your letter. So make it easy. Okay. Here's a picture of a real study session. It is that dire. You got 30 people in a room. They all have a laptop. They have microphones to talk to each other. They've dragged in their lunch. And they sit around like that to talk about your grant. This is study section 101. This picture fills me with like, oh, they start at 8 in the morning and they end at 6 at night.
Wow.
It's a lot of work to be on study section. You learn a heck of a lot. It is really interesting, but it is that glamorous. And then you get paid $200. Wow. Okay? These people are really committed to having you be successful. Okay? They are not here to say, let's throw them all out, we're not going to fund anyway. They're really looking for people that they can support. This makes them feel good. It makes them feel good when you can say, this is the best grant in my product. That's good. Okay? Remember, if you're getting 10 grants, 2 of them might get funded. Okay? So there's an enormous amount of work here that's trying to help your project be better by people who are really committed to it, who are being treated really well in the Marriott or somewhere. And the NIH can't provide coffee or lunch. I mean, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. But these guys are really committed to doing well. So they're going to read the grants at home, probably in advance. They're going to submit initial scores before the meeting. The scoring is going from 1 to 9. And the primary and secondary will send their scores in before the meeting starts. And one of these people is probably the program officer. I can't really tell. This person's talking, but I don't know where the boss is. So this the NIH review people are here. And they will look at these scores. And if the primary and the secondary send in preliminary scores that are, let's say, 5 and 6, that grant will not get discussed at the study section. You will get their written comments back, and you will get an asterisk in the place of the number. Okay? So it's not scored. That has happened to probably every single person that you work with. Okay? It's horrifying, but it happens a lot. Okay? That means it's just not on the top half of the pile, and they're not going to spend time talking about it. It does not mean that that's failed, okay? You need to read the narrative summary statement to find out what they did like and what they didn't like, and think about how you can respond to the things they didn't like. First, you go out and you play a lot of pool for like 24 hours. Then you come back and you do it. Okay. Your application, if it's discussed, gets about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, right? So here's primary reviewer, you know, this grant is really blah, blah, blah. This person is probably reading this email. This person is probably reading something else, a journal article. They're supposed to be paying attention. This person might be reading your grant, not a reviewer is reading your grant online. They're doing all kinds of stuff at the same time, but they're listening to what the primary and secondary reviewers are doing. They're going to say, I give this the 1 and the 3, and then the whole group will score in whole numbers, right? So they'll say, oh yeah, I kind of believe, you know, Renee, reviewer 2, yeah, I'll give it a 2. And so everybody that does it averages it out. The scientific review officer who is in review will take notes in this part, and you are not allowed to go back and talk to the review staff about the review. Not ever. You can go back. Remember that program officer you had before? Mm-hmm. And you are absolutely forbidden from contacting any study section members. They will reveal that, and boy, bad things will happen. Okay, so do not do that. The third thing is, on this study section, let's say this person's a GW, faculty member, okay? And your grant's being reviewed here. We have lots of people who sit on the study section. Your grant's being reviewed here. This person wouldn't be sitting here anymore. So the GW grant comes up. In this case, he has said there's a conflict. I'm at the same institution. This person would be outside of the room while your grant was discussed, would not make a score, would just be gone, wouldn't know anything about the grant, would come back in. Do not contact the GW person in the study section. How was my grant? Did you see? Did she score that too? Do not do that, okay? You really need to leave them to do their job, okay? All of those things are conflicts, and they all have to get declared. Yeah.
How often does it happen that every single person is a better spokesperson than the other? How often does it happen that someone who speaks very well and goes for a certain grant, their grants are more likely to get funded?
You have found one of the big problems in peer review. Okay, so people who are really experienced at study section can have a lot of influence, positively and negatively. And it's a really bad thing. Mostly those people have a conscience, and they recognize that they can't get alternative grants funded, right? So you will hear some real sense that they'll say, this is the best one I have, or something like that gives you a clue where we are. But the charismatic component can be strong in both directions. You do have 2 reviewers. People know, they know the study. This study section meets 3 times a year. The same people, plus or minus. So you kind of know. When I sat on the study section, there were people who really liked fancy universities. Well, she graduated from Harvard, therefore this must be a great proposal. And you're like, no, it's not, right? But that would always be part of that person's rendition of the candidate. The candidate is a graduate from Yale, and therefore blah, blah, blah. And you're like, it doesn't matter, okay? So you know that among your colleagues. It is absolutely true that different things are valued by different study sections. These are human beings. They're all out doing the business, and some of them are more swayed by certain things. So you can hear it when they talk about your grant proposals. So I think it's mitigated somewhat because there's another 30 people in the room. And people do challenge each other respectfully, and it does get discussed and resolved. So it's something to worry about, but don't panic. Now, I made up that this person was from GW. This person is a really good person to talk to while preparing your fellowship, because he can't score your fellowship or be in the room, but he absolutely knows what the function of the committee is. And it's perfectly okay to say, Dr. Jones, could you read my grant proposal? Totally appropriate, because he can't score it, right? So now you want to know who sits on everything, and I know some people on the case studies right now. So it is really worthwhile to hear from people who have sat on the study section. It doesn't necessarily have to be the exact one that you're going to, but who have study section experience, because they know what's going on there and they can give you advice and it's not illegal. Okay. A large number of folks are going to get a summary statement. This is the first page of a real summary statement that comes back in your ERA Commons, and it will say, this particular one was discussed. So it has an overall impact or merit. It has a paragraph that is supposed to summarize what was discussed by the study section together. Okay? So this is where they're going to say, well, we talked about this, and some people thought that was better, and some people thought that was worse, and we finally resolved this by saying they should do so-and-so. And it's supposed to summarize what was discussed. Further into it, you're going to have the verbatim comments of the primary and secondary reviewer. Just whatever they wrote. Okay? And sometimes it'll contradict things, sometimes it'll be laudatory, sometimes it'll be horrible, and it's always written as bullets of strengths and weaknesses. I like the part where it says none, but that doesn't help you if you don't have a good score. Okay? Okay. You're not going to memorize this. The criteria that the reviewers use to review your grant is in the funding opportunity. Section 5 or 7. When you've written your grant, go read these. Okay? So, are the applicant's academic record and research experience of high quality? Maybe one of your summary statements should be, my academic record and research experience are of outstanding quality. Outstanding is the best word to use. Okay? Does the applicant have potential to develop into an independent productive researcher? I'm hoping that you and your advisor have said, Ms. Jones has outstanding potential to develop into an independent researcher. Obviously, if you say this and there's nothing there to support it, it's going to sound kind of foolish. But it's a good place to summarize, right? Summarize how the things that you've told them about are contributing to the quality of your application. Look at the reviewer's statements and make it really easy for the reviewer to actually know, are the qualifications of collaborators, including their complementary expertise and previous experience, in fostering the training of fellows appropriate? It would be nice if I knew that about the collaborators. So make it easy. NIH fellowships are reasonably successful. It depends on each institute. There are 27 institutes and centers at the NIH. Not all of them fund exactly the same things, but the fellowship success rate, this means for your fellowship, even if you had to resubmit it, that counts as one, that about 22% of them were funded. The fact of the matter is quite a lot of them are funded on the resubmission. Okay? So if you don't get funded the first time, do not just stamp your feet, say, that's it, I'm out of here. Revise it according to that summary statement. You have a chance for an introduction, and you are pretty likely to fall into this group. Okay. Do the stamping the feet with the full thing. Okay. The IBS website lists both predoctoral and postdoctoral fellowships from foundations. If you're either of those things, go look at that, because there are probably multiple places you can submit the same project. Okay. It's really worthwhile getting the bang for your buck. Resources. So, I told you about the University of Alabama Birmingham Grant Library. I talked a little bit about the training modules in rigor and reproducibility. We're going to try to figure out how to work this into a lot of the graduate training here, because this is kind of a big deal. Lots of you have been on my IDP. There's an NIH research training website that talks about foundations. This is an online resource that I've given to some of you, a practical guide to writing an NRSA grant. It's available online at Science Direct. That's pretty cool. Andrew Hollenbach walks through each of the sections in the grant and in a narrative way says, here's where you may want to make this case, here's where you want to make that case. So if that's a way you like to learn things, that might be helpful to you. My only hazard on any of these, and particularly with this one, is this was published in 2014, which means it was probably written in 2013. So the forms that are used at the NIH and some of the criteria have changed since then. So it's useful, but be careful. You're responding to the immediate FOA. Okay, so you may find some things there where you go, that's just not right. It probably isn't right. Just use, buyer beware. It's really helpful in the narrative. It may not exactly agree with your FOA. That's what I wanted to talk about, and I'm happy to answer more questions. Yeah?
I was going to go back to the co-sponsor, sorry. If
it were to work out where I could have a co-sponsor at another institution, what is that process like, or how is that different, and like what sort of institutional agreements do I need to have in place?
You don't want to do that.
No, okay,
You really don't want to do that. That person could be on an advisory committee,
right.
totally fine, but that person's, why do people have co-sponsors or co-mentors? It's usually because the investigator you're working with doesn't have that capacity. So having that person be somewhere else isn't going to help your mentor develop that capacity. So there's a backstop if your trainer is just not prepared for this yet, right? So you really want them to be available to your trainer. It's pretty hard to do that.
In continuation with this question, suppose if we have someone who has this expertise, but like you mentioned, if they are junior at the university, can we kind of collaborate with those junior faculty and have the mentors who is probably somewhere else and have like a nice call? Does that work at all? No?
No, we don't like that, because it's the same problem over and over again. So you're much better off to say, I'm working with junior investigator whiz-bang, and he or she has money, but hasn't graduated a student yet, or hasn't had a postdoc yet. I'm going to align with senior investigator in the same department, okay, who's trained 25 people, knows that when you fight about this and that, there are ways to resolve that. And this person will be on my advisory committee or will be on my thesis committee, depending on what's going on. Or I might work with the postdoc in that person's lab as a collaborator. But you need to have a role for the co-mentor. They aren't just there on a piece of paper. Okay? They're there to help us go right. So the NIH is really happy to invest in fellowships, but the real plan here is to make you successful. So I know that we're sort of talking about ways to finesse a few things, but the goal is that you be successful. So they're not doing it for you to find a sly way around it. They're doing it so that there's sort of insurance at the institution that whatever's happening now is going to go okay.
Yeah.
Right.
The reason why I was asking is it's kind of similar to K99.
Well, you're going to launch it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? All right. So the other piece is, at least for people who are in School of Medicine and Health Sciences, I will happily read the sections if you're at 31, give you feedback.